Let's discuss the situation in Ethiopia further. Joining us live from Washington, D.C. is Neamin Zeleke. He's a former Ethiopian opposition leader. Thank you very much, Mr. Zeleke, for joining us on this News Hour.
Thank you.
Thank
you for...
Our pleasure. What do you make of the latest escalation of tensions in Ethiopia?
Well, there's a natural and inevitable outcome of this law enforcement operations being carried out by the federal government of Ethiopia against the Rogu regional leadership that wanted to take over the northern command of federal government by massacring hundreds of Ethiopian soldiers and trying to take over the weapons, the heavy weaponry stationed there in Northern Command. So this has been going on for 3 weeks, and it is escalation. The escalation, in a sense, the federal troops have taken over a large swath of territories in Tigray region. Now in Mekelle is encircled by federal forces from all directions.
Right. Now, Mr. Zeleke, so that our international audience can understand it in a better way, can you please help us understand if Ethiopian government sees the Tigray region or the Tigray people as part of Ethiopia? Because certainly the government cut ties back in October with that region, didn't it?
Well, the federal government and the Ethiopian people at large consider Tigray region and Tigray people as integral part of Ethiopia. There is no doubt and question about it. But unfortunately, the narratives that have been around in the national media domain by most, if not all, medias and pundits alike have characterized it in a very, very unfortunate and sad way. That's why there is that perception which you just said it. That's very unfortunate. But the fact remains, this conflict is between a Rogu leadership in Tigray that did everything to destabilize Ethiopia for the past 2 years. You have to understand that the leadership in Tigray that created havoc for the past 2 years, that have been belligerent towards the federal government and the prime minister, that have incited and instigated ethnic violence in Ethiopia, that openly declared that unless they rule Ethiopia, Ethiopia can disintegrate. This is the context the international community is not willing to understand. And the Prime Minister's office has issued a statement, 3 pages, how they have went all the way to create dialogue, reconciliation, and peace with the regional leaders. In fact, from the beginning, when the reformist government came to power, they were given a golden parachute because these people have presided over atrocities, war crimes, even genocidal acts in the cases of Somali region and Gambella. And these people have presided over massive corruption, estimated at $30 billion. And these people lost that hegemony, that undue privilege, that undue power that they exercise on behalf of 6% of the Tigray population they claim to represent, while in fact they don't represent the Tigray population. So, in a nutshell, this operation, this military campaign for law enforcement in Tigray was forced upon the Prime Minister and the government of Ethiopia. They have, in fact, been appeasing. If anything, the federal government, many Ethiopians criticize for not taking the action that should have been taken a year and a half ago when they openly declared they want to have a relationship with Ethiopia like the Somaliland has with Mogadishu. In other words, they want to declare their independent state. They had this vision from the beginning, 46 years ago. If they can rule Ethiopia, it is fine, it is good, as dominant player. If not, they had a vision for greater Tigray state. So this is the context that the international community does not understand. This is not the typical African civil war. This
Okay.
government, these regional leaders have been given all kinds of chances for peace and dialogue, but they rebuffed it. They were defiant. They violated all rules in the book.
Right. So, Mr. Zeleke, as I understand, you support Prime Minister Abiy's offensive against the TPLF in Tigray. Now, as you know, as a result of this offensive, thousands of people have been forced to flee to neighboring Sudan. What are your thoughts about this? Because certainly we have to differentiate between the TPLF and the people who live in Tigray. But unfortunately, as a result of this latest offensive launched by the federal government, many civilians are also being forced to flee and become refugees.
That's a very pertinent question and a worry for the majority of Ethiopians. My understanding, first of all, let me point out, I have been against championing democracy and human rights in Ethiopia for 25 years. Okay? And I am not a blind supporter of the federal government. There are many challenges. But I will tell you, what we have seen in 2 years was unthinkable when these leaders who are in Mekelle now, rogue leaders, were in charge and in control of the federal government. I have been championing human rights and democracy in Ethiopia, and this reformist government has brought about many changes, unthinkable 3 years ago. Now, I still see a lot of problems and challenges in Ethiopia, but these are manageable. We can solve it through dialogue, discussion, and national reconciliation and national conversation. But the TPLF chose to impose its will on the people of Ethiopia unless it regains back its domination and monopoly of power it enjoyed for 27 years. Now, coming back to your second part of the question, this humanitarian dimension, where people are suffering, we know many thousands are fleeing, and the government and the international community should do its utmost to minimize the suffering and to ensure that our people, the civilian population, the Tigray population, is getting the support, getting the aid.
If I may interject here, Mr. Zeleke, now recently Prime Minister Abiy said that he does not welcome the type of response that is coming from the international community towards the latest escalation of tensions in Ethiopia. So how do you expect the international community to play its role when a sitting prime minister is saying that he does not welcome such a response?
Yes. Look, there are two sides to this issue. Number one, the international community, some governments, some actors have been trying to arm twist the prime minister and the federal government to dialogue with a rogue regime that any country would not dialogue or reconcile when you are attacked and backstabbed by your own regional government on a federal government. That's what happened. If in Florida, Southern Command has been attacked by terrorists or regional leaders in Florida, massacring the Southern Command in Florida, would the United States president sit for a negotiation? There is no even a moral equivalence between federal government entrusted with the protection of the Constitution and all its territories, including the federal army, and the regional rogue group that has violated every rule, as I said earlier, for dialogue and peace. And they went ahead to attack and massacre hundreds of people. There is no sense in the international community is playing double standard. I understand the humanitarian concern, but no country would tolerate, no country will allow this kind of treason and crime committed against its own federal troops and sit down with the terrorists and rogue leaders who try to blackmail by amassing the weapons in Northern Command and trying to impose their will to come back to power and to sit the neighborhood. That's what the international community has been trying to do. Now, on the humanitarian front, the Prime Minister and the federal government has been very clear. They accept all kinds of humanitarian assistance, and the national the disaster preparedness agency, my understanding, my information is working with the international donors and agencies to make sure that people are not suffering and they get the aid and support that they need.
Right, but I do have another question here. Don't you think the international community is rightly concerned when one of the military spokesperson in Ethiopia appeared on the state television and said, quote, "We want to send a message to the public in Mekelle to save themselves from any artillery attack and free yourselves from the junta. After that, there will be no mercy." Mr. Zeleke, I'm sure you know that hundreds of thousands of civilians live as well in Mekelle.
Right. Look, I heard that comment, that statement coming from the colonel. I don't believe, subsequently I heard and read a statement from the federal government, from the state of emergency committee established for this purpose. I don't think he reflects the policy of the federal government on this matter. I think that was an arbitrary statement made. I don't think
what I'm trying to highlight here, when the international community hears such kind of a statements being made by a sitting military spokesperson of Ethiopian military, it is rightly concerned, isn't it?
Yes, it is a concern. That's why the federal government is doing its utmost to minimize civilian casualties. That's why we Ethiopians abroad are calling on the TPLF to leave Mekelle. And if they refuse to surrender, they have to fight. But they should not be using the people of Mekelle as human shield. That's what they are doing. The international community should rather focus on putting all its weight for TPLF. If it doesn't want to surrender, let it be a man and fight it out with the army instead of using the people of Mekelle as human shield. That should be also an issue the international community has to consider. Put a pressure on TPLF and hold them accountable if there is civilian casualty and people are caught in crossfire and many people will die in that eventually, then they will be responsible because they chose to make the people of Kabbalah use them as human shield.
Now, Mr. Zeleke, let me widen the discussion a little bit here. How likely is a dialogue-based solution at this point? Because the TPLF has also said that even the fall of the city will not spell the end of the fight. Prime Minister Abiy has also pledged an all-out offensive against the TPLF. So, correct me if I'm wrong, a dialogue-based solution at this point is impossible.
Impossible with the current leadership of the TPLF. The TPLF is a large organization. There may be, elements within it that are reasonable, rational, and not involved in the crime that has been committed on Northern Command soldiers and also my cadre, which have been investigated by Amnesty International. Massacre of 700 civilians, non-Tigrayans were massacred under the auspices of TPLF leadership in that area. A youth group organized by the TPLF committed that heinous crime. So all these people who are being involved, how could you sit down and dialogue and negotiate with them? There are elements within the TPLF, rational and reasonable. Further down the line, it may be possible to negotiate, talk with them, dialogue with them. But the current leadership needs to be defeated and brought to justice. That's what needs to happen. Any self-respecting country would do that. No other way out.
Okay. Now, my last question to you. What do you think the federal government should do at this point to give guarantees to the ones who live in the region of Tigray that if they're not associated with the TPLF, the government will let them go? Because certainly right now the rhetoric is high. Many in Tigray region are feared for their lives.
Well, if you really do your investigation, talk to people in the areas that have been freed by the federal government, you would hear stories contrary to what you just said. People are relieved that they are free. please call in Tigray region, try to get information. There are areas that have been liberated, such as Aksum, Adigrat, and Adwa. People are expressing on national television how relieved they are. And I mean, this is not about ethnic Tigrayans versus Ethiopians or federal government. This is about certain leaders who have amassed billions of dollars, who had an agenda from the beginning. If
Mr. Zeleke, if I'm interject here, so you're also indicating that the thousands of people who have fled to neighboring Sudan, they have fled because of the TPLF, not because of the offensive launched by the federal government?
It's both. It's both. Because of the TPLF repression and measures against non-Tigrayans in Tigray region, a Wolkite area that have been liberated, and also fleeing the conflict, as is natural in any other conflict. So it is not, I mean, you hear all kinds of stories. You know, the TPLF propaganda, deception, disinformation machinery has been extremely effective in staging such interviews so that, you know, the international community is convinced that Tigrayans are being persecuted, that there is a genocide, that the issue is ethnic. That's not the case. There are Tigrayans in the federal government key positions. There are Tigrayans in all places, in the army included, even today, after the TPLF organized Tigrayan officers, TPLF officers in the army to perpetrate the massacre that happened on the 4th of November, there are still Tigrayans functioning, working along with the federal government. So the world community has to be clear. This is not about ethnic Tigrayans versus the federal government or the Ethiopian people.
Okay.
Our people. Tigrayans are our people. Tigrayans are our people. They are integral part of Ethiopia, as I said earlier. This is about against a group, a junta, that has ruled Ethiopia with impunity and they carried out all kinds of human rights violations, large scale, including war crimes, and embezzled. Now, they lost that monopoly, that hegemony, that domination. They want to come back. This is about that. This is not ethnic Tigrayans versus Ethiopians. It's about a group, a rogu, cynical, extremely people with cognitive dissonance that has lost all rationality, cannot accept the reality, the change, where they are not the drivers of Ethiopia. They cannot accept, they cannot reconcile.
Okay, Mr. Zeleke, if I may add one more question here. So you are indicating that no other ethnic group in the future will rise against the federal government like the TPLF did, correct? You're confident about that?
There are, look, it is not about the Prime Minister and the federal government policy has been that of reconciliation, diversity, peace, and diversity with unity. It is not about imposing one ethnic group over the others or the interest of certain clique from an ethnic group like TPLF did for 27 years. That's not the agenda. It's about democracy, human rights, peace, reconciliation. That has been the policy of the Prime Minister and the federal government for the past 3 years. And this is an anathema, contrary to the vision and the policy of the TPLF when it had power for 27 years. So in this circumstance, there may be some ethnic entrepreneurs, as any other society, who have their own narrow agenda, who play the ethnic card to mobilize their constituencies. But other than that, the issue is not about one ethnicity against the other. The issue about certain people who think that they are the custodians of that ethnic interest, but in fact, they have their own agenda, their own ambition, and a sickness. In fact, I would call it in the case of TPLF, it's an aberration. I mean, these are aberrant people, extremely delusional, cynical, and cruel, and extremely corrupt. The problem for the past 2 years is the fact that they had all the power, economic and national, political power, army, security, they had domination. They lost that. They cannot live with this reality. They cannot live as equal. Even the people, non-Tigrayans, who work with them, prominent EPDRF officials like Redwan Hussein, now he's part of the administration in the federal government, Minister of State at the Foreign Affairs. He said the key problem, the main problem with the TPLF is that before they were the overlords, they were calling the shots, they were given the chance to administer the region, to live as equal, but they cannot accept that. That's the statement from a person who worked with them for some 20 years as a senior official, an Tigrayan person. So this is not an ethnic issue. This is an issue with a rogue group, a cynical group, an extremely corrupt group that wants to dominate Ethiopia, if not create a separate
now,
Tigray
so
state.
if this is not an ethnic issue at all, so you are also indicating that Ethiopia is not going to have a problem with a centralized government.
My position is that in a diverse country like Ethiopia, we need a federal arrangement. And the Prime Minister and the federal government, the reformist government, has been very clear. We need federalism. We cannot go back to a unitary state. A federal arrangement with democracy. First of all, the one issue that the TPLF and its foreign allies have been peddling is that the Abiy administration is backpedaling on federalism and trying to create a unitary. That's a false argument. First of all, in 27 years, there was a federalism in name, but in practice, it was an extremely monolithic arrangement whereby all the shots were being called by TPLF and its handpicked regional or federal representatives who are beholden to the TPLF, not to the people that elect them. But this time we need federalism, but with democracy, whereby the regions are administered by people elected by their own people, and instead of appointed by the federal government, as it used to be in the name of federalism, the sham federalism, during the tenure of the TPLF.
Mr. Neamin Zeleke, thank you very much for taking my questions. I really appreciate your taking out the time.